What would you do if, while piloting an aircraft with 175 passengers, you saw a female figure walking calmly across the runway, but the control tower swore there was absolutely no one there? This is the story of a miracle of the Virgin Mary that saved hundreds of lives in the American sky, and that forever changed the life of pilot Michael Harrison. But before we continue, leave a comment telling me where you are watching from and what time it is where you are right now. I would love to see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary are reaching. Michael woke up at 4:20 in the morning that April Saturday, just as he had done for 16 years. At 44 years old, with more than 13,500 flight hours accumulated, Michael was considered one of the most competent pilots of the airline. A veteran of the United States Air Force, where he had served for 8 years flying F-15 fighter jets, he had developed an impeccable reputation for precision and composure in emergency situations. His colleagues called him Radar Mike because of his ability to process information quickly and make decisions under pressure. That morning, while preparing his coffee in the quiet kitchen of his home in Arizona, Michael followed his meticulous routine. The first cup of coffee always at 4:30, followed by checking the weather conditions on his iPad. The report showed excellent conditions, partly cloudy skies, excellent visibility, calm winds, an ideal day to fly. Michael smiled discreetly. He liked simple and predictable flights. Laura, his wife of 18 years, came down the stairs, still in her pajamas. She always woke up to say goodbye to him whenever he had early morning flights. "Coffee is already ready, love," Michael said, kissing her on the forehead. Laura was the opposite of Michael in many aspects. Where he saw science, she saw faith. But that difference had never caused serious problems between them. In fact, Michael admired the serenity that faith brought to Laura. "I'll pray for your safety today, just like I always do," Laura said, holding Michael's hands. He nodded affectionately, but inwardly remained skeptical. 16 years of commercial aviation, more than 3,000 flights completed without a single incident, had convinced Michael that safety was a matter of training, maintenance, and proper procedures, not of prayers. The children were still asleep. Ryan, 12 years old, dreamed of following in his father's footsteps and becoming a pilot. Sophie, 8 years old, always asked if her father met angels in the clouds when he flew. Michael always responded with scientific explanations about cloud formations and atmosphere phenomena, but secretly he found his daughter's imagination enchanting. At 5:15, Michael left home. The road to the airport was empty. Only a few truck drivers making early morning deliveries. During the 40-minute drive, Michael mentally reviewed the flight plan. 2 hours and 50 minutes of flight over familiar territory. The Boeing he would command was relatively new, only 3 years in service with an exemplary maintenance record. The airport hummed with pre-dawn energy as Michael pulled into the employee lot at 5:15. The terminal glowed against the dark Arizona sky, its windows reflecting the first hints of approaching dawn. He gathered his flight bag and walked with steady purpose toward the crew briefing room. Daniel Brooks was already there, reviewing weather patterns on the large display screen. At 32 years old, with 8 years as a first officer, Daniel had earned Michael's trust through consistent professionalism and calm competence. "Good morning, Captain," Daniel said, looking up with his characteristic easy smile. "Beautiful day for flying." Michael nodded, pouring coffee from the thermal carafe. "Perfect conditions. Partly cloudy, excellent visibility, calm winds. Should be routine." They reviewed the flight plan together. 2 hours, 50 minutes to Seattle. The Boeing 737-900 was relatively new, only 3 years in service with an impeccable maintenance record. Michael appreciated working with Daniel because the younger pilot was meticulous with procedures but never tense. At 5:50, they headed toward the aircraft. The ground crew was completing final fueling and inspection. Michael performed his external walk-around, visually checking tires, wings, control surfaces. Everything gleamed in the pre-dawn light, perfect and ready. Inside the cockpit, Michael began his pre-flight ritual with the precision of a watchmaker. Every button, every indicator was checked following the checklist strictly. Daniel followed along, confirming each item. Their movements were synchronized, practiced, the dance of professionals who knew their craft. Meanwhile, 175 passengers were boarding. Families talked quietly, children excited about their journey. Business travelers stowed laptops and settled into their seats. An elderly couple celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary held hands across the armrest. Ordinary lives, ordinary people, trusting that Michael would deliver them safely to their destination. At 6:28, Michael requested clearance to start engines. The reply came back clearly. Cleared to start engines. The familiar sound of the turbines coming to life filled the cockpit. Michael always felt a special satisfaction at this moment, the transformation of a static machine into something alive and powerful. Ground control, ready for taxi, Michael transmitted. The response was immediate. Clear to taxi runway 16 left via taxiway Alpha. Michael repeated the instructions, confirming the route. The aircraft began its slow movement along the taxiways of the airport. During taxi, Michael observed other planes preparing for takeoff and landing. The familiar airport routine unfolded as always. Everything was exactly as it should be. But it was during this taxi that Michael began to feel something different. An unusual calmness took hold of him. It was not nervousness. Michael never became nervous before flights. It was something more subtle, a sense of serenity he could not explain. It was as if a quiet presence had entered the cockpit, although he could not see anything different. The sensation was comforting, yet also unsettling because of its inexplicable nature. Daniel noticed the change in Michael's expression. "Everything all right, Captain?" he asked. Michael nodded, but he remained intrigued by that strange feeling. In all his years in commercial aviation, he had never felt anything like it. At 6:40, the aircraft reached the runway holding point. Michael contacted the control tower. "Tower, ready for takeoff." The reply came after a few seconds. "Hold for clearance." Michael waited, hands resting on the controls, that inexplicable serenity still surrounding him like an invisible blanket. At 6:45, the tower finally transmitted. "Clear for takeoff, runway 16 left." Michael repeated the clearance and slowly guided the aircraft into its final position on the runway. The main wheels aligned with the runway center line. Michael checked the instruments one last time. Everything was normal. He placed his hands on the thrust levers. It was a movement he had performed thousands of times, but in that moment he felt an inexplicable hesitation, something very subtle, almost imperceptible, as if an inner voice whispered for him to exercise extra caution. Michael slowly pushed the levers forward. The engines responded with their familiar roar, and the aircraft began to accelerate. The speed increased progressively. Passengers in their seats felt the force of acceleration pressing them back. Children looked out through the windows. Executives closed their laptops. Everyone preparing to leave the ground. It was exactly at 40 knots of speed that Michael saw something that would change his life forever. A female figure was calmly walking across the runway, directly ahead of the aircraft. She wore a long light blue gown that moved softly with a breeze that did not exist. A cream-colored veil partially covered her head, framing a young and serene face. She was approximately 1.62 meters tall and moved with a supernatural grace. What impressed Michael the most was not only the presence of the woman on the runway, but her complete tranquility. She did not run. She did not show panic. She made no desperate gestures. She simply walked toward the aircraft, as if she were strolling through a garden. Her movements were fluid. The blue gown seemed to radiate a gentle light of its own, even under the strong dawn light. At that instant, the roar of the engines began to sound muffled, as if someone had turned down the volume of the world. Time stretched. Every noise became distant, until only the accelerated rhythm of Michael's breathing remained. And along with the silence, a delicate fragrance, almost imperceptible, of unknown flowers filled the air. More than seeing, Michael felt. An unshakable peace filled his heart, a profound certainty that nothing could disturb that moment. Michael then noticed a strange pressure in his ears, similar to what he felt when the plane changed altitude too quickly. But the aircraft was still on the ground. There was no logic to it. While everything seemed suspended, the figure walked serenely, each step carrying a supernatural grace. Michael blinked rapidly, but the vision remained. It was not an illusion. It was not a dream. It was real. And at that moment, Michael reacted instantly with his military pilot reflexes. Tower aborting takeoff. Person on the runway. He shouted into the radio, simultaneously cutting engine power, applying maximum brakes, and activating the reversers. The aircraft decelerated violently, forcing all passengers against their seatbelts. Tires screeched against the asphalt. It was an emergency situation executed to perfection. The response from the tower came immediately charged with confusion. Negative. The runway is clear. I repeat, the runway is clear. Controller Thomas Carter, a veteran with 12 years of experience, could not understand what was happening. His cameras showed a completely empty runway. The ground radar detected no object at all. Every indicator confirmed that there was absolutely nothing on the runway. Michael kept the aircraft stopped, engines idling as he stared intently at the female figure. She kept walking now more slowly, her eyes fixed directly on the cockpit. They were deep eyes filled with an ancient wisdom radiating a peace Michael had never experienced before. When she smiled softly, he felt a wave of absolute protection envelop him. Control, I can clearly see a woman in a light blue gown walking in front of us, Michael insisted, his voice firm despite the absurdity of the situation. Daniel beside him stretched his neck, trying to see something. Captain, I don't see anything on the runway. The passengers were beginning to murmur, worried about the sudden and unexpected stop. The control tower immediately dispatched emergency teams. Security vehicles rushed from their bases at high speed, heading toward the runway. Meanwhile, technicians frantically reviewed the recordings from the security cameras, searching for any sign of the person the pilot claimed to be seeing. During those tense minutes, Michael continued observing the female figure. She had stopped walking and now seemed to be blessing the aircraft with gentle gestures of her hands. Her movements were ritualized as if she were performing a sacred ceremony. The cream-colored veil fluttered lightly, occasionally revealing more details of her youthful and serene face. The emergency vehicles reached the runway, inspecting every meter of the asphalt, desperately searching for any sign of a person. Their voices came through the radio. Tower, runway completely clear. No sign of human presence. Area totally safe for takeoff. 25 minutes passed in this deadlock. Air traffic control, frustrated and confused, decided to review all records of aerial movement in the region. That was when they made a discovery that would explain everything. In the logs appeared the trace of a small aircraft that had irregularly crossed the airport's airspace. The airplane was a Cessna 182 piloted by Gerald Matthews, a 58-year-old farmer who owned a property 40 kilometers from the airport. Gerald had taken off from a private airstrip to pick up veterinary supplies in a nearby town. During his return flight, his transponder and radio suffered technical failures, leaving him unable to communicate with air traffic control. Without transmitting his position and flying at only 500 feet of altitude, his presence went unnoticed by the surveillance systems. The discovery was devastating in its implications. The Cessna had crossed directly into the exact takeoff path of Michael's flight between 6:45 and 6:47 in the morning. If Michael's flight had departed as scheduled, the collision would have occurred approximately 45 seconds after leaving the ground, when the commercial aircraft would have been at about 300 feet of altitude and traveling at 150 knots. At that height and speed, any attempt at an evasive maneuver would have been impossible. The collision would have been inevitable and absolutely fatal for both aircraft. The controllers fell silent as the reality of the situation became clear. Daniel Brooks turned pale as he realized just how close they had come to a catastrophe. The ground crew who had searched the runway began to understand that perhaps there were forces at work in that airport beyond their comprehension. It was at that exact moment when the discovery about the Cessna was confirmed that Michael looked again to where the woman had been standing. She was no longer there. The runway was empty, exactly as everyone else had insisted the whole time. But now Michael understood. The overwhelming sensation of mission accomplished swept through him. The atmosphere in the cockpit changed instantly. The tension that had dominated the last 25 minutes vanished as if it had never existed. Daniel took a deep breath for the first time since the beginning of the incident. Even the passengers' voices sounded calmer, as if an inexplicable peace had descended upon the entire aircraft. That night at home, Michael described to Laura in detail the woman he had seen on the runway. Every detail of the light blue gown, the cream-colored veil, the deep eyes, the serene smile. Laura listened in silence, tears forming in her eyes. When Michael finished, she went into her room and returned with an image of the Virgin Mary. The resemblance was perfect. The light blue gown, the cream-colored veil, the serene posture, the expression of infinite kindness. Everything matched exactly what Michael had seen on the runway. Laura revealed that very morning she had felt an unusual urgency to pray for her husband's safety. She had spent 20 minutes on her knees asking for special protection for his flight. Michael, the man of science, the military veteran who always sought logical explanations for everything, finally understood that he had witnessed a miracle of the Virgin Mary. His seemingly irrational refusal to take off had saved not only his own life, but also the lives of 175 passengers, the crew, and the farmer, Gerald Matthews. From that day on, Michael was never the same. He remained a technically perfect pilot, but now carried a spiritual dimension that completely transformed his perspective on flying. Before each flight, he prayed silently, asking for protection for everyone under his responsibility. He developed an inexplicable sensitivity for situations that required extra attention and intuition his colleagues began to notice and respect. Daniel Brooks was also deeply affected by the experience. Although he had not seen the Virgin Mary on the runway, he had felt the supernatural presence in the cockpit. He began attending church regularly and developed an interest in spirituality that he had never had before. The Harrison family was transformed by the miracle. Laura wept with gratitude when she understood that her prayers had been answered in such a direct and powerful way. Ryan and Sophie were astonished by the story, and Sophie said she had always known that there were angels protecting her father when he flew. Michael had to admit that perhaps his daughter's imagination was not so fanciful after all. The case was never officially reported as an apparition of the Virgin Mary. The records only state that the flight aborted its takeoff due to unidentified traffic on the runway, and that a Cessna was later discovered flying without authorization in the area. But Michael knew the truth, as did Daniel and Laura. This miracle of the Virgin Mary teaches us that divine protection manifests itself in ways that often defy our rational understanding. In a world dominated by technology and skepticism, there are still higher forces at work to protect the innocent. The sincere faith of a wife praying for the safety of her husband resulted in the salvation of hundreds of lives. Michael's story remains a powerful testimony that we are not alone in the skies or on the earth. The Virgin Mary continues to intercede for her children, appearing when necessary to prevent tragedies and to protect those who are in need of help. Sometimes her intervention is subtle. At other times, it is dramatic, as on that Saturday in April. How many other tragedies have been avoided by interventions of the Virgin Mary that we never came to know? How many pilots in critical moments have received an inexplicable intuition that led them to make the right decision? How many prayers of wives, mothers, and families have been answered through silent miracles in the skies? Michael never forgets the woman in the light blue gown who saved his life and the lives of innocent people. He knows that on that day, he witnessed something far beyond aviation, science, or human logic. He found proof that faith is not only a consolation for the weak, but a real and powerful force that can alter the course of events and save lives. May Michael's story inspire you to keep your faith alive, to pray with sincerity, and to trust that the Virgin Mary continues to intercede for all of us. In a world full of visible and invisible dangers, it is comforting to know that we do not fly alone through the skies of life. Now I would like to invite you to a brief prayer. O Virgin Mary, most holy Mother, refuge of all the children of God, we now place ourselves under your maternal gaze. Before you present our lives with our pains and hopes, our fears and dreams, trusting that no request made with faith ever goes unnoticed by you. Beloved Mother, cover with your sacred mantle every family that prays with us. Protect the homes, strengthen marriages, bless the children, the youth, the elderly, and console those who feel alone. Wrap in your love those who suffer with health problems, those who are in hospitals, those who face invisible battles in silence. Virgin full of grace, intercede before your Son Jesus for all of us. May tears be transformed into hope. May sadness give way to joy. And may every heart receive the peace that comes only from God. Teach us to remain firm in the faith, even when trials are great, and help us to see the hand of God in every detail of life. Mary, Mother of tenderness, we ask that you never leave us alone. Guide our steps, illuminate our paths, deliver us from all evil, protect us from every danger, and always lead us closer to your beloved Son, Jesus Christ, the only source of salvation and eternal life. May at this moment your maternal blessing descend upon all of us. May there be health for the body, peace for the soul, wisdom for our choices, love within families, protection along the way, true joy in our hearts, and the certainty that we are never abandoned because Our Lady walks with us. O Mary, we cry out full of faith, remain with us today and always, and make of our lives a living testimony of the love of God. And now I want to hear from you. Do you believe that the miracles of the Virgin Mary still happen in our days? Write your answer in the comments, or even share your testimony of faith. It may be that your comment consoles and strengthens someone in need of hope. Michael Harrison continues to fly, now with 44 years of age and a completely transformed perspective on life and death. Before every flight, he touches the small medal of the Virgin Mary that Laura gave him, a physical reminder of the day divine intervention saved 175 innocent lives. His colleagues at the airline noticed the change in him. The confident pilot who once relied purely on instruments and procedures now possesses a deeper awareness, a spiritual sensitivity that makes him an even better captain. He speaks openly about his experience to other pilots, though many remain skeptical. But those who know Michael, who understand his military background and 16 years of flawless service, cannot easily dismiss his testimony. Daniel Brooks was promoted to captain 2 years after the incident. During his promotion ceremony, he publicly credited Michael with teaching him that true aviation excellence requires more than technical skill. It requires humility before forces greater than ourselves. Daniel now keeps his own Virgin Mary medal in his flight bag. The Harrison family attends church together every Sunday, something that never happened before that April morning. Ryan, now 14, speaks of becoming a pilot like his father. Sophie, now 10, still insists she can feel angels around them. Laura's faith, once a source of gentle disagreement, is now the spiritual foundation of their entire household. Michael often says that his wife's prayers saved more lives than all his years of training ever could. Gerald Matthews, the farmer whose Cessna crossed paths with destiny that morning, learned of the full story 6 months later when a journalist investigating unexplained aviation incidents tracked him down. When told that a commercial pilot had aborted takeoff because of a vision that appeared exactly when Gerald's aircraft was crossing the flight path, the old farmer wept. "I should have died that day," Gerald said quietly. "My transponder failed. My radio failed. I was flying blind through controlled airspace. If that jetliner had taken off on schedule, we would have collided at 300 feet. Nobody survives that." He now keeps a picture of the Virgin Mary in his Cessna cockpit, and he has never flown again without first saying a prayer for protection. The story of flight to Seattle, the aborted takeoff, and the woman in the light blue gown has become a quiet legend among pilots and air traffic controllers in the Southwest. It is rarely spoken of officially, but in break rooms and crew lounges, the story is shared as a reminder that sometimes our instruments and our eyes see different truths, and sometimes the truth we cannot see is the one that saves our lives. How many other near misses have been prevented by forces we do not understand? How many times has divine intervention altered the course of events in ways too subtle for us to recognize? Michael Harrison knows the answer. Every time, every flight, every prayer. The Virgin Mary continues her work of protecting her children, appearing when needed, intervening when necessary, saving lives through means that transcend human comprehension. If you have been touched by this story, if you believe in the power of faith and prayer, share this video with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment with your own testimony of divine protection. And remember, we are never alone in the skies of life.